I too acknowledge the traditional owners of the land upon which we meet, and I pay my respect to their elders, both past and present. And of course, amongst Indigenous Australians, we're very fortunate to have in our ranks Alan Deary McCarthy, Linda Burney and Pat Dodson. And I think it does show that the Labor Party is doing what it can now and what it should do to ensure that our first Australians have a voice in the laws affecting all Australians. And there are some great Labor elders here tonight too. It's fantastic to see John back. I don't know if John's got the shakes or if he's feeling as good about being back in a caucus room as we are to see him. And of course, Race Matthews and Bob Carr. You're very distinguished people who've spent a lifetime contributing not only to the Labor Party but to make Australia a better place. I understand Steve Bracks sends his apologies and I wanted to pass them on too. I acknowledge all my caucus colleagues here. They're all motivated to see not just Labor do well now, but Labor do well in the future. And all of us who serve here understand that we're just passing through this place and we want to leave it better than we found it. And we believe sincerely in our commitment, therefore, to the Labor Academy, the pilot project. I just should also mention, I don't always do this, but I think a few people do need a bit of a mention from within the ranks of this project, acknowledgement that it's not easy starting anything new in the Labor Party. There's always 20 people who'll tell you why you can't do it, another 20 who'll tell you that it's never been done, and another 20 who'll try and work out what it means for them. But Stuart Whitman for your creativity and tireless campaigning in the past 18 months. Tim Sonrech, who's chairing the trustee committee, and his fellow Australian Fabians. Roger Byrne, Frank Alfacci, Pauline Gambley and Victoria Fielding, welcome. Associate Professor Ken Coghill, who will chair the curriculum committee, and his deputy Mike Smith. And of course, the President and our Vice President who are here, Mark Butler and Tim Hammond, who backed this initiative, which is appreciated. We know that citizens in Australia are no different in many ways to a mood that's sweeping the world. That politics as usual just doesn't cut it. And that just turning up to do the same things in the same way is not going to be a message of reform which will engage all of our fellow Australians. People do want better from us, and they want better from all who serve in this place. They do want an end to some of the hyper-partisanship. The Labor Party must be custodians of the adversarial system because that's the conflict and test of ideas. But I think we're reaching a point, we see it more often every day with our opponents, that whatever the issue, their only focus is the destruction of Labor. And I think we need to step up and be our better selves in terms of the way we organise for the future of this country. I think it's never been a more important time for the Labor Party to be relevant and for us to reach out and appeal to people who quite frankly are disengaged from politics. You know, when we put the case, why join the Labor Party, people say, well, what can they get done? And how does this place work? It's some irony that I'm here with Race. Race was my state member when I joined the party back in, or when I tried to join the Victorian branch back in 1984. It took 6 months, a lot of persistence, some intervention from Race's office as well, just to penetrate the Victorian branch. But that process is still going on too. Just before I could say what every Sydney sider was thinking. But the point about it is that there are issues out in the community which people want us to act on, and we should not be as hard to be involved in as I think we make it. I do public meetings, town halls every week. We've got one in Canberra tomorrow night. We've had 900 RSVPs. There is an appetite to be involved in politics. And our challenge is, how do we capture that mood for change? How do we capture people who want to make a difference? There's plenty going on in the country, like we need a progressive government. 57,000 full-time jobs gone. Over 1 million Australians regularly record they want more work than they're getting. We've got this latest battle over penalty rates, just to name an obvious issue. 680,000 people with no compensation will just get a cut in pay on 1 July, unless they're covered by a union agreement. Which in the short term is a good incentive to belong to a union, but in the longer term, how do we end up in a set of circumstances where corporate profits are the highest that they've been in 40 years and wages growth is the lowest it's been in 20 years, Yet the government's giving a tax cut to corporations and standing by and allowing the pay of Australians to be cut, working Australians. So there is appetite. But how the Labor Party captures this appetite for involvement, I think, is the challenge. Many people here have endeavoured to go on improve the participation of people in the party. No one has a monopoly on the correct way to do it, but there's plenty of people here who've stood up for rank and file reform, debates about pre-selection, debates about how we pick the leader, you name it, and plenty of people here have engaged to try and make the party more accessible. The reason why I like this pilot project, though, is that the best way we can make the party more accessible is to empower our party members. Now, there have been changes. Kevin Rudd, to his credit, did pioneer a change in terms of giving the rank and file a say in the leadership, election of the leadership of the party. It was a good change. We've now moved to a goal of 50-50 in terms of representation of men and women in the party by 2025, and we are up to 43%, which is good. It's not where we need to be, but it's a far sight better than the Liberals or the Conservatives. Our party membership in 2013 was probably around 40,000. It's now north of 60,000. So there are some things that are working. A week and a half ago, we had the first meeting of a National Indigenous Labor caucus where we invited state and federal MPs to participate. It showed that actually the Labor story is a bit better in Indigenous representation than we initially thought, but there are some states where there's no Indigenous representation, so the picture wasn't uniformly positive. These are all good developments. But the reason why I am absolutely backing this project in the Labor Academy is that it shouldn't be hard to join the Labor Party, as it was 30 and 40 years ago, but it still is. The processes of decision making shouldn't be as opaque as they are. Now, no one gets to Canberra by being naive. We understand how it works. But what we also need to understand is that we could be a much bigger party if we made the process of belonging to the party easier. Teaching people the history of the party is a good first step. Explaining to people our values is another very good step. Explaining to people how the system works and how people can be involved is another very good step. I think that this is an important development. I know the branches will be watching it. It's got to be done in conjunction with National Office. I know there's more caveats than a contract. I understand that. But what I think is important in this party is that when someone has a new idea, we don't immediately get out a stick and beat it like a brown snake in the kitchen, and instead we say, all right, this is where we need to go. So I think this is a good development. I think the basic failing of the Liberal Party is that whatever we think about the calibre of their representatives, they are out of touch with the needs of the people of Australia. But we can never afford to assume that we are in touch with the needs of Australians without working on it daily. I believe one of the best ways we retain a connection with the lives of ordinary Australians is inviting as many ordinary Australians to be part of our movement. We can win this next election, but we don't have the money of our opponents, we don't have the media editorials of our opponents, but we've got a better program. What we need, though, is more people to talk about that program. You know, imagine if Malcolm Turnbull actually had a Banking Royal Commission. Imagine if he reversed his cuts to Medicare. Imagine if we could have a country where you didn't see your penalty rates just slashed arbitrarily with no intervention from the government. Imagine if we were a country who actually prioritised apprenticeships. Imagine if we were a country who actually had an emissions intensity scheme and had therefore proper policies on climate change. Imagine if we had a country where women were paid the same as men and treated equally to men. Imagine if we were a country which had a foreign policy which recognised that we need to, whilst working with our allies and working in our region, maintain our own independent mind and thought. This is the sort of country we can create, but we need the party members to do it. I'm motivated by this project. It will, and I think that all of us here want to see the same success. Thanks very much for all your help.